This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hello, my name's Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always. That's absolutely all you need to know about me. In terms of the podcast, what we're here to do, as the title suggests, is just that talk about the stories of films. So I talk about development stories, production stories, behind the scenes, bits and bobs, and all those little bits and things that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to choose have a bit of a mainstream leaning to them. I also don't tend, as a rule, to pick films I'm not that keen on. I have to be interested in them to some degree, although in a little bit of an exception to the rule, I'm not massively keen on the two films that I'm talking about in this episode of Film Stories, although I am really quite interested in them both. I think both of them have interesting merits to them. I think both of them have interesting stories to them. They just fell, for differing reasons, just a little bit short. I'm going to start in 2017. I'm going to do quite a recent one for me, really. I'm going to play you a clip, and then I'll come back to it, start telling the story, the other side of this.
You hear that?
What?
Nothing. No birds. No animals. Nothing. What happened here?
Well, that was a snippet from the trailer of 2017's Alien Covenant, directed by Ridley Scott. The screenplay in the end credited to John Logan and Dante Harper. Story credit went to Jack Paglen and Michael Green. Cast of the film was led by Michael Fassbender, joined by Catherine Waterston, Billy Crudup, Danny McBride in there as well. And it was, I don't think you really need me to tell you that 2012's movie Prometheus, which was really where the story of Alien Covenant began, although you can trace it back to the original Alien, and I'll come to that shortly. But Prometheus was something of a divisive piece of work. It was a hugely anticipated one as well. The idea of Ridley Scott for the first time coming back to the Alien franchise since 1979's Alien to direct what was then posited as an Alien prequel. Well, that was hugely exciting. I mean, he'd been linked with returns to Alien before that hadn't come to pass, and so here it was. He was back signing on the dotted line to effectively there's no effectively about it, the franchise that he started. When Prometheus came out, it turned out it was going to be a little bit more than a straight prequel story, and it was a bit of a mixed beast. I think that's pretty fair to say. And as a consequence, whilst it returned $400 million to 20th Century Fox off its $120 million production budget, the audience reaction was very split. And I kind of bring to mind Tim Burton's attempt to reboot Planet of the Apes back in the early 2000s, where the box office returns were strong, but such was the audience backlash against the film that Fox abandoned carrying on with a direct sequel to that film. In the case of Prometheus, I think the reaction was slightly better. I still think the first half hour of that film is quite incredible. But conversely, it was very clear that it hadn't quite hit home with audiences in the way that Fox wanted. So it had a choice to make. Prometheus set up another film, and Fox was keen to make another film. That originally Prometheus was going to be the film that joined up to Alien, but then as subsequent interviews went by and time went by, Scott kept finding more and more films to sit between Prometheus and Alien, and it had a couple of options. So Scott was open about the fact that he wanted to make another film, but also around this time there was talk of another Alien project going on, and this was in the hands of District 9 director Neil Blomkamp, who we learned was working on a direct sequel to Alien and Aliens that would have scrubbed effectively Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection out of the franchise's timeline. This would have brought Sigourney Weaver back. It would have picked the story up from the end of Aliens. And it would be fair to say there was a lot of fan fervour behind it. Blomkamp released development art in the end from the film on Twitter, and that fan fervour just didn't die down at all. But realistically, Fox had a choice to make about which project to back, because it didn't really want to be pressing ahead with two Alien films. It already had another Predator film that was going through the works. It would become The Predator, a film I don't like at all, I'm afraid. But does it back Ridley Scott and a further Alien movie, or does it back Neil Blomkamp and go with the one that really the fans were leaning towards more at that time? Scott was the choice for the studio in the end, and to put it in some degree of context, Scott was making some quite a lot of films for Fox at the time, and particularly The Martian had gone on, which I've covered in a previous episode of Film Stories, had gone on to be a huge hit. He'd also done stuff like The Counselor was in there as well, which hadn't been a huge hit, but it was clear that Ridley Scott on form could deliver real box office, real acclaim, and The Martian got Oscar nominations as well, and so Fox decided to press ahead with him for another Alien project, and eventually Neil Blomkamp's Alien sequel died a death. I mean, at the time this was being recorded, he's just come off doing a direct sequel to RoboCop Returns. He was the director of that, and now he's just left that project. There were still decisions to be made, even though the film that would become Alien Covenant was now pressing ahead. Damon Lindelof, who who was co-executive producer of the TV show Lost, of course, and worked on Star Trek, he wasn't that keen on returning to the sequel. And he gave an interview to Collider where he talked about making Prometheus its own thing, moving it more away from Alien than it had ultimately become. And this whole idea of the sequel then would be a Prometheus 2 rather than an Alien sequel. And that's the direction that Lindelof thought it should go. And at one stage, that was the plan as well. So the film was announced at one point. Scott dropped this in an interview, said it was going to be called Alien Paradise Lost. And even though that brought Alien back to the title of it, that suggested a different film than the one we got. This would have followed the engineer's backstory from Prometheus and developed that. And Scott gave interviews in the between Prometheus and Alien Covenant coming out, where he talked about the fear that the alien had been heavily exposed and covered, and so he was tempted to move more and more away from the alien creature itself. But then that reaction to Prometheus also looked like it sparked a change in course. What happened at that point was a change in writer. So if we go to the summer of 2013, so that's a year after Prometheus has come out, in came Jack Paglen to put together the screenplay for the film, and I believe he was the first writer who was formally hired to do so. He'd penned the film Transcendence, which hadn't gone down a storm, but he put his screenplay together. By March of 2014, in came Michael Green, who was hired to do a rewrite. He's worked on the likes of Blade Runner 2049 and Murder on the Orient Express subsequently, and also Logan, of course. What a film. Then after Green had taken his stab at the screenplay, a further script was ordered from writer Dante Harper, and then that script in turn was handed over to John Logan. Now, John Logan had worked with Ridley Scott before on Gladiator, and over the course of these different writers coming in, the decision was made to make this more and more of an Alien film rather than a Prometheus film. And so John Logan gave who basically came in and was the last screenwriter on it, certainly the last credited screenwriter on it, he boarded the project and then did an interview subsequent with Creative Screenwriting, and he talked about he wanted to write a horror movie because he found the elements of Alien that are so profound, and he wanted to capture that with Alien Covenant, quote, whilst also trying to pay homage to the deeper implications of Prometheus. He said, quote, Prometheus picks up that seed, but in Alien Covenant we wanted to be much more direct about it and make the spiritual element about religion and believing in God. And thus that's the way he took his screenplay. Now, there's a little bit, I'd suggest, of having your cake and eating it in trying to be both a sequel to Prometheus and a prequel to Alien at the same time, but that was clearly the decision that had been made. And if anything, the move on the surface was back far more towards Alien, and ultimately the title Alien Covenant was announced. This was going to be an Alien film. In terms of moving forward, one of the side effects of the script decisions that were made was the sidelining of Rumi Rapace's character from Prometheus. Her character, Shaw, was, I don't want to go heavily spoilery, but it would be fair to say, not at all the focus of the film, to the point where it was announced beforehand that she wouldn't be reprising her role at all. Instead, the focus moved to Michael Fassbender's character, David, and there was clearly fresh casting that needed to be done. So it was by the summer of 2015, Scott was ready to get going on the film. He completed The Martian, and he said that they were scouting locations for the film in the summer. And around that point, Fassbender was confirmed to return. By the end of 2015, it was announced that Catherine Waterston was going to take on one of the starring roles in the film, and she would ultimately be joined by the likes of Billy Crudup, Danny McBride, Callie Hernandez in there as well. Scott, it is worth noting, was adamant throughout that the film would be getting an R rating. Now, in terms of where to shoot it, well, that was something of a problem, because they originally inquired about getting studio space in the UK to film Alien Covenant, but they just couldn't get it. There wasn't the room needed for at that point for a production of this size. And in the end, the film ended up shooting in Australia and New Zealand. Now, this was, in fact, a part of it is shot on the same backlot as Mad Max Fury Road. The government was offering significant tax breaks that helped, but it was also the fact of just not being able to find the space anywhere else. And the filming, in fact, would run for 75 days from April 2016 to July 2016. The film would come in for a slightly cheaper price than Prometheus as well. The quoted budget for Alien Covenant is $111 million, and Scott was pretty efficient. Well, he's hugely efficient about getting that made. Even before filming had begun, though, there was thinking of the film afterwards, and it had become clear by this point that this was very much back on a franchise track with more than one sequel to come, and Scott wanted to be involved with it this time. He, along with James Cameron, who directed Aliens, of course, both have expressed frustrations and disappointment really with the way that the Alien sequels went, and Scott wanted to have more creative control this time. He said in November 2015, he announced that Alien Covenant was now the middle part of a new Alien trilogy, and this was news to us at the time, because it was expected, first of all, that Prometheus would join up to the original Alien, then it was expected that Alien Covenant would join up to the original Alien, then there was another sequel as well to follow, and then Scott in later interviews would also add that there was a possible fourth prequel before it would all join up with the original Alien series. It's an awful lot of backstory to cover, but also in terms of impacting the production of this film, it became clear, the more and more interviews that Scott gave along these lines, that it would have to set up the next film, which it does. Again, I'm not going into mad spoilers or anything like that here, but it's very clear that Alien Covenant has been in part engineered to make sure that there is the next Alien film. The filming, once it was wrapped up, Then it was down to, when are we going to see the film? And 20th Century Fox had real confidence in this. The post-production was going well. The film was bubbling along, and so originally it had announced a release date of the movie for October 2017. But then it moved it forward. Deciding this was going to be a summer blockbuster. It moved it back to August of 2017, and then it moved it forward again to May of 2017. Now this, just doing a bit of math, that takes 5 months out of the post-production of the film. But Scott is an incredibly efficient filmmaker, and the film was delivered on time. It was a little bit of a belt to the line in the end, and the movie was indeed ready for its premiere. Now, the film did premiere in May 2017, and that was actually an event I got to attend. And without spoilering, again, I'm trying to dance around this and play a little bit light. One of the things I noted about that premiere was there was a massive vehicle from a tie-in sponsor who clearly done some kind of product placement or sponsorship with the film, and the brand name of that massive vehicle, the company behind it, played an unusually pivotal part in the last act of the film. I do think it was pointed out to me by someone from, it was the editor of Digital Spot I sat next to at the time, that it's a very, very blatant piece of product placement to be used in the final act of a film, although for spoilery reasons I'm not going to go deeply into that. It is worth noting that during the filming of the movie that Scott was committed where possible to using practical models of the aliens to give, of the xenomorphs, to give people something to act against rather than ping pong balls, blue ping pong balls on top of sticks. There's also material that was subsequently released that didn't make the final cut of the film. There's quite a lot of deleted scenes and prequel material, in fact, that appeared subsequent to the film coming out. But crucially, when the film did arrive in cinemas, they hit the same problem again. The Alien Covenant had been made in some way more of an Alien film as a reaction to the Prometheus, I'm loath to say backlash, but certainly the Prometheus debate that had gone on. But by trying to blend the two of them, I think whilst reviews of this one in some cases were quite ecstatic, I think in some cases this one probably lost the audience a little bit more by trying to do both things. And thus, when the box office, I mean, Scott at the premiere of the film did take to the stage. I remember him saying, I think this one will do quite well. And it was all very open at that point that another film was on the horizon. But the box office was dramatically down. That this one was, Prometheus had taken $400 million worldwide. This one took $240 million worldwide. And Fox thus had another decision to make. Because what had been happening whilst Alien Covenant was filming was the script of the next chapter was already underway. It was going to go by the name of Alien Awakening, and notably in the build-up to Alien Covenant's release, Scott had given an interview to the Sydney Morning Herald, which I don't think really helped the perception of it, where his quote was, "If you really want a franchise, I can keep cranking it for another 6. I don't think anyone was really in any doubt about that. But he did also say, I'm not going to close it down again, no way. The whole idea of someone going off and making not very good sequels just didn't appeal to him at all. Since the film was released, well, quite a lot has happened. So in September of 2017, even with the box office down, 20th Century Fox boss at the time, Stacey Snider, did say it was a financial disappointment, but that also they were keen still to go ahead with the next sequel. However, that project was soon delayed. And in fact, by the end of 2017, Scott was talking about how the next film would be more on the androids and the artificial intelligence device as opposed to the xenomorphs themselves. And again, he was reiterating the thing about how we've seen the alien, we're trying to do something else, which, given that opportunity was there a little bit more at the end of Prometheus to follow that different path, there's a little bit of, well, has that bolted a little bit? Then things sort of went into limbo a bit. That by the end of 2018, it was still said to be on, it was still said to be happening, but the future of 20th Century Fox itself was under some threat. That Disney at that point was circling the idea of buying the studio, and it was a case of getting the boxes ticked on that. But then, even in the aftermath of Disney's acquisition of Fox, the Alien franchise is one that doesn't appear to have died just yet, that there is still some sign that this is going to press ahead again. And in fact, Scott himself is still said to be down as director of whatever the next Alien prequel is called. And I think it's earlier this year that Variety was reporting that a fresh Alien prequel was now in the script phase. So it's fair to say whichever script, whatever the state of Alien Awakening script, that's not likely to happen now. That if there is going to be another one of these prequel films that does try and join it all up, that it won't be whichever script was being produced while Alien Covenant was being written. The future really is in Disney's hands. I mean, that much is clear. What's also clear is that Disney's heavily evaluating the Fox slate. I mean, this has been recorded at the point where basically the vast majority of projects that are in development at 20th Century Fox have been gutted by the new Disney regime, and quite where Alien comes out the other side of that remains to be seen. What I would say is that in both Prometheus and Alien Covenant, Scott did get to make the films that he wanted. He did get to make two very identifiable Ridley Scott films that added to the Alien franchise in a way that he wanted. I don't think either of them is massively successful. I think both of them are flawed. I think in their own ways they're both beautiful. It really is all lies next on just which direction Alien goes. Will there be another Ridley Scott Alien film? At the moment, that's the plan. And like the rest of you, I just wait and see. And with that, we land at the halfway point of this latest episode of Film Stories. I am going on tour. I'm taking Film Stories and my new book, The Secret Life of Movies, on the road. If you are interested in coming along in September 2019, when this is being recorded, I'm going to be in Halifax in the UK. I'm going to Birmingham. I'm going to Northampton. I'm just sorting out dates for October and November at the moment. You can find out all about those tour dates at www.filmstories.co.uk. Also, at the point that this issue has been recorded, I am signing off the latest issue of Film Stories magazine, which is soon to head to the printers. You can find out all about our print magazine and also Film Stories Junior magazine, which is for under 15s, at www.filmstories.co.uk, and you can order copies of them both there. One further small favour too, if you don't mind, if you do like this podcast, then please do go and leave a review, hopefully a really good one, at your podcast repository of choice. And if you can subscribe as well, that really helps. I am just a small independent. I don't have a great big huge clanking corporation behind me, and so any push you can give me is really, really appreciated and really does help. And with that, I'm going to move on to the second film in this episode of Film Stories. This time we're going back to 1992, and as per normal, I'm going to play you a clip, and the story comes the other side of this.
Job Smith is the Lawnmower Man. A man
Joe, come on, boy, let's go. Grass is waiting for you.
with the mind of a child.
Yeah, Cybo Man. He came to see me.
Cybo Man. Comics, right?
Yeah, Cybo Man.
And a doctor
Virtual reality holds a key to the evolution of the human mind.
with a vision of the future.
I have a game in my house that you might like to play. Would you like that?
Yeah. Okay. That was really bad.
That then is a little taste of 1992's The Lawnmower Man, directed by Brett Leonard. Screenplay credited to Gimel Everett and Brett Leonard. Loosely based, we're coming to this a couple of times on a book by Stephen King, but not. The cast for this one were Jeff Fahey and Pierce Brosnan took on the lead roles. You'll also find in there Jeffrey Lewis, Jenny Wright, Dean Norris is in the cast as well, and Jeremy Slate. And I mean, you can't even begin to talk about about the film without acknowledging up front that The Lawnmower Man isn't based on a short story by Stephen King, as it was heavily advertised at the time. And I will come back to that. It is arguably that and a virtual reality sex scene that the film are best known for. But actually, considering it was a movie made in 1992, the origins do actually lie to a slight degree back with King's short story that he penned and published back in 1975. Now, the Stephen King tale, The Lawnmower Man, is about a man called Harold. I've not read it, so I'm surmising. A man called Harold who hires basically a man to mow the lawn for him, but in this case, the lawnmower does the work. The man worships a Greek god. The lawnmower kills people, and New Line Cinema acquired the rights with a view of turning this into a film, one of a bunch of King properties that were sold before he switched agent, as the story goes. Now, separately to this, a young upcoming filmmaker by the name of Brett Leonard had, along with producer and co-writer Gimel Everett, they were putting together a story by the name of Cyber God, and this was entirely unrelated to Lawnmower Man. But the two would join together. So the catalyst for this was a low-budget feature film that Leonard had at this point done. It was his feature debut called The Dead Pit, that had earned some success, that not lots of zombies in there. And off the back of that, he came to the attention of New Line Cinema. Well, more to the point, he came to the attention, as he told/filmed an interview, to producers Bob Pringle and Steve Lane. And they saw The Dead Pit. They were involved with a producer by the name of Edward Simmons, who, along with his business partner, who's Harvey Goldstein, they had the rights to the short story, The Lawnmower Man. It was only a 7-page short story, it's worth noting that, and it was about the man controlling a lawnmower by telekinesis. And by this point, Brett Leonard had separately become hugely interested in the emerging virtual reality technology. He'd always been a tech nerd. And so Cyber God wove in threads of virtual reality. And so at the point where New Line approached him, it basically came up with this, well, let's combine the two into one. And so Cyber God became The Lawnmower Man. And what Leonard wanted to do with his film was just show how far virtual reality could go in the midst of a science fiction movie. But heck, were there challenges ahead? So let's contextualise this. This is the start of the 1990s. Terminator 2: Judgment Day's groundbreaking visual effects are about to make it the first $100 million film just to physically make. Jurassic Park would follow 2 years later, although that was more modestly costed, about $65 million. The budget that The Lawnmower Man was working on, sandwiched between these two projects, was, now it's reported at just $6 million. And most of that had come from investors and from New Line. And New Line wasn't the entity that we know it as now. Obviously, Nightmare on Elm Street had a huge impact on New Line's bottom line, but still, subsequently, it's been bought up by Warner Brothers. It did the Lord of the Rings films. It did Austin Powers trilogy. But at that point, it was a much smaller enterprise. And because $6 million was going in, and it was smaller companies who were putting the money in, they wanted their return quicker. And this, all of a sudden, from the off, put a real time pressure on The Lawnmower Man. And so New Line had the conversation with Leonard. It was looking to ink the deal, and Leonard explained to them what he wanted to do with his virtual reality movie. And the executives just look at him and just say, well, how on earth can you possibly do that? How on earth can you visually realise that level of effects in this film? And Leonard assured them at that point he knew exactly how to do it, which in subsequent interviews he has just been completely open about. That was a straight bluff. At that point where he was sealing the deal to make the film, apparently he had no idea at all about how they were going to do it, because The Lawnmower Man was always going to be a massive effects challenge. That this is still renowned for being groundbreaking, for presenting virtual reality in a piece of what's become, I say mainstream cinema, it's more become a cult hit, but a mainstream release. Even though, of course, it's not presenting virtual reality on screen. You didn't sit wearing a headset watching it, but certainly the view of it was groundbreaking and very VR driven. Now, because there wasn't much of a budget to play with and there was a lot of effects work needed, some ingenuity was needed. Because I mean, whereas something like Terminator 2 has something like 7-8 minutes of computer effects on screen, Lawnmower Man actually has more, and they had to come up with sort of nimble ways really to get this done. And they needed, what Leonard needed was an upcoming company who could do the work and take the leap off the cliff with him. And he ended up at the door of two different places. So one of them was Angel Studios. At this point, it had done mainly promotional work. I mean, it had done an ad for Scientology at this point, and its sheer style attracted Leonard. And he also hired a company called Zeos to do some of the other work. And between them, they split the 3D and the 2D work. Angel Studios, if you want an extra bit of nerdy trivia here, they were the studios who did put together the infamous virtual reality Nookie scene, is now better known by as a company called Rockstar San Diego, which the video gamers amongst you will know that Rockstar San Diego is behind such juggernauts as Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2, two of the biggest video games of recent times. At the point the Lawnmower Man was being made, however, both of the effects houses who were working on it were working with single figure head counts to do the work on the movie, and that work needed to be completed in well under a year. Now, there is some very detailed dissection of just what the effects work entailed that you can find online. I really enjoy reading the work of Ian Fallis. You can find an article he's done on it at vfxvoice.com, and just the sheer challenge of what they were up against to realise all of this, it just can't really be understated. Casting wise, I mean, at the point Pierce Brosnan landed the role. I mean, he confesses in the disc extras, even on the fairly sparse original disc that came out, there's been a much more substantive collector's Blu-ray that's come out in America. But Brosnan admitted he wasn't really into video games or anything like that at all. So the whole arena was pretty much new to him. In the case of Jeff Fahey, well, he took on the role of Job in the film. As the story goes, the character of Job's hair was originally going to be red, but it had to be changed to blonde because on Fahey's head, when they tried red, it just didn't work at all. He came to the Lawnmower Man off the back of roles in films such as White Hunter Black Heart, the Clint Eastwood movie, Out of Time, Iron Maze. I mean, he wasn't a big name at that point, and I mean, you can argue he's not a massive name now, but he's certainly a notable and well-known actor. And so there's two relative unknowns at that point. That's what I'm trying to get across, that Brosnan's fame was still a few years away. He wouldn't be James Bond, although he'd been offered it at that point but couldn't take it. But he wouldn't be James Bond until GoldenEye came out a few years down the line. And so what Leonard had was I wouldn't say a truncated schedule just to shoot the film, unknowns, a heavy reliance on effects work that hadn't really been done before, and not very much money to do it all with. Filming in the end just ran from May 1991 to June 1991. And to give you an idea just how fast they had to put it together, the American release of the film was actually March 1992. So that's 8 months of post-production. You knock a month off that for striking the prints and for the physical distribution of cans of film around the country. This really was quite a race against time. But it wasn't helped by the fact that when the film was wrapped up, New Line was keen for a cut of the movie that was under 2 hours long. Now, Leonard's original cut of the movie was much longer than that, and he put together, he put together, again, up against this fierce deadline, a rough cut of the movie that was sent out for testing. And the test audience, it went out to the National Research Group that does most of the test audience work in the US, and they reported that audience were saying the film was too long and too complicated. And of course, at this point, Brett Leonard, it's his second film. He wasn't in a position to fight back against that. And also, New Line really wanted its hit. So it decided to, it decided to direct the film towards the 14 to 21-year-old male market. And to do that, it wanted to heavily promote the special effects, and even though the aforementioned virtual reality Rumpy Pumpy scene is such a small part of the film, you couldn't miss it. I mean, the Film Review magazine, I remember in the UK, I think it even might have had it on its cover. So exposed, chortle, was that particular moment of the film, even though it was such a tiny part of the movie. Double chortle if you really want to go for that. And so, but this was part of the marketing drive that New Line devised for the film. They really wanted to sell the gimmick of the technology, and so they needed a cut-off Leonard that zeroed in on the special effects, brought those front and centre, and so things like a 10-minute sequence at the start of the film was soon gone, and it was a sequence that did a lot of the character introduction work and set up the relationships. There's a sequence later in the film involving the character of Job that got chopped down from 4 minutes to 20 seconds in all, and there was inevitably, when the film did come out, there were complaints really that it was massive. Once you take away the spectacle of it, from a narrative point of view, it was a bit all over the shop, that there appeared to be bits missing. It wasn't massively logical, and amongst the people who would have agreed with you with that was Brett Leonard. In the edit of the film, just to get a theatrical cut together, they were furiously trying to make sense of it all, but it just wasn't there. However, this was something that had quite a fast, happy ending as it happened. Because what was going on in Hollywood around this time was there was a slight drive towards extended versions of films on video. So this was the VHS era, and VHS sell-through had been a surprise to Hollywood. It hadn't expected it to take off, but it did. And what it devised, and boy would this be ruthlessly used in the DVD era, was different ways to try and get us to buy the same VHS tape twice. So Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves, for instance, an extended version of that was released on video, adding about 50 minutes of extra footage. It was also released in cinemas, to be fair to it, but also the Godfather trilogies had been repackaged, and that had proven to be a big seller. And so with that in mind, and noting some of the feedback from the film, New Line Cinema would approach Brett Leonard about an extended cut of The Lawnmower Man. Now, by this point, the film had become a surprise hit at the box office. In the US alone, it grossed some $30 million. I mean, this was really good money for the kind of the kind of low budget movie that it was. It took even more overseas. It had opened up actually against a Columbia Pictures movie called Gladiator, not that one. This one starred Cuba Gooding Jr. And when the Los Angeles Times did a post-mortem article on Gladiator's box office failure, and it did say that Columbia Pictures just hadn't spotted the word of mouth building for The Lawnmower Man, and that's what had happened. The promotional campaign for the film had really been that effective. So going back to post-release, New Line approached Leonard about releasing an extended director's cut on video in the same year, 1992. This wasn't a case of 5 years after the time, so this was quite groundbreaking in its own way. And they funded the extended version of it. And in an interview that Leonard did with the Washington Post around the time of the release, he just described his process as, quote, "I just put the story back in." And the film was the director's cut comes to 2 hours 21 minutes. The running time of the theatrical version something like an hour and 3/4. The video of the director's cut sold an extra 250,000 copies in the US alone. I mean, this turned into a really profitable movie. There was, of course, the unavoidable one person who wasn't happy with all of this, and that was author Stephen King, who, like many people, had noted that the film barely bore any resemblance at all to the 7-page story on which it purported to be based. New Line had actively promoted this film as based on the novel by Stephen King, although by the time King and his lawyers acted very quickly, because by the time the UK release followed a few months later, there was, I remember, stickers being put over the posters on cinemas over King's name. King took legal action about it. He argued that the film really just didn't really cross over with his book at all, and he won his case against New Line, although New Line still issued it on video originally with King's name on it. But now every copy you find of The Lawnmower Man doesn't have Stephen King's name near it. There was one section, I think, apart from the title of the book, there's a scene in the film, and there's a lawnmower in it, so there's a crossover there, but there's a scene in the film where a cop says something like there's a missing piece of a dead man in a bird bath, and that apparently is the only other thing directly taken from King's short story. The Lawnmower Man story didn't end at that point, because when you do a small independent hit, and New Line had this with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which had been a couple of years before, which had been the biggest independent hit of all time at that point, it it wanted to act fast, and it wanted a fast sequel. Too fast, as it would turn out for Brett Leonard, who was developing a different project at the time. And so instead, the sequel would press ahead a few years later with a different creative team and a different cast as well. This time, it was called Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace. So if you're in certain places, it was called Job's War. It came out in 1996, so it still took a bit of time. Farhad Mann took over the director's chair. He wrote the screenplay for it as well. The cast this time was led by Patrick Bergin and Matt Frewer. And the film actually this time cost about $15 million to make, but it was savaged by critics, and its box office return was under $3 million. Farhad Mann, just for a bit of extra trivia for you, will go on to direct another sequel, Return to Moon Junction. I'm afraid I've not seen that to be able to give you any kind of deep insight as to that movie. What I can tell you, though, is the Lawnmower Man has really endured. I mean, Brett Leonard will go on to do Virtuosity with Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe. But also, notably, as well as becoming a cult hit over a period of time, I think the Lawnmower Man has finally been recognised for just what a groundbreaking piece of filmmaking it was from a visual point of view. And Leonard's subsequent work has been involved heavily in digital and working with assorted studios, and still really some really quite innovative work that he's stayed involved with. And yet I'd wager hard money that the project that he continues to get the most questions about is the Lawnmower Man, because it really does stand alone. There wasn't a whole bunch of films that followed in its footsteps either. Not even its sequel could compellingly follow in its footsteps. And even though it's a flawed film, it is an enjoyable one, and the director's cut is a notable improvement on the theatrical version. It also goes to show, though, sometimes that when you're stuck, you get the opportunity to make a film. You don't necessarily have all the answers. Sometimes it's just worth barreling forwards and figuring them out. That then has been the latest episode of Film Stories. You can find me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find the entire Film Stories project on Twitter at Film Stories Pod. Our website, as I've plugged ruthlessly in this episode, is www.filmstories.co.uk. You can find a whole bunch of video film stories exclusive to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Film Stories. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Film Stories Online. I think that's all the web links I need to give you at the end of a podcast. I hope to see some of you as I go out and about around the country taking Film Stories on tour. The podcast is going to carry on, and so I thank you as always for listening to this one. You all take care. I'll be back with you soon with another bunch of film stories. Bye bye.